Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm Q. I'm here with Carl and Dennis. We're going to be doing a short webinar just to talk about EB-5, a few key factors for investors, just so that we can give you a general idea of what EB-5 is and what the process to do EB-5 is. Um, Carl and I work together. We work for EB-5 Coast to Coast. And then Dennis is here. Thank you so much for being here, Dennis, by the way. Dennis is here. He's an immigration attorney, and he's going to be giving us, the immigration, the attorney side of EB-5. Dennis, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Q. Thank you, Carol, for having me on. My name's Dennis Tristani. I'm an immigration attorney. I'm the founder and managing attorney at Tristani Law, based just outside of Washington, D.C. I've been in the EB-5 field and business immigration industry generally since 2012. Look forward to talking about EB-5 today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dennis. So let's start this off here. Um, Give me one moment. Here we go. So, an overview of the EB-5 program. If Dennis, if you could just tell us, in general, why does EB-5 exist? Like, why does the US offer this program?
Yes, sure. So EB just means employment based. So employment based fifth category. EB-5 is a pathway to a green card. The program itself essentially was established in 1990 as a way to stir and create jobs in the U.S. to cultivate economic activity and growth. The Regional Center pilot program was introduced shortly after the EB-5 law passed almost 34 years ago.
Wow.
The EB-5 program, Regional Center program, I should say, has always had to be renewed by Congress. It was renewed in 2022 as part of the Greater Reform and Integrity Act that passed in 2022. So the Regional Center program is renewed until 2027, and there are efforts already underway to renew it again. Generally speaking, EB-5 is about investing funds in a U.S. entity that stirs economic activity and creates at least 10 jobs, 10 positions per investor. So if you're an EB-5 investor, you have two pathways to pursue. There's the regional center process, which a vast majority of EB-5 investors pursue, which is a much more passive investment that you make through a USCIS authorized regional center that is authorized by USCIS to pool investor capital on behalf of multiple investors and deploy that capital into a larger project that creates jobs. Or you can pursue the direct EB-5 path, wherein you create your own company, you invest in your own company that you're either an owner of, a minority or majority owner of, and that individual company or its subsidiaries create jobs. So think of gas stations, small hotels, any type of small business could potentially qualify. That being said, a vast majority of investors opt for the regional center program for a variety of reasons.
I actually am very interested on having another webinar with you to kind of dive into the difference between direct and regional center.
Sure,
It's a whole topic on its own, and it's very
it
interesting.
is.
Actually,
It is.
I would be very interested to chat with you about that. But
Happy to.
as it stands right now, I just have a quick question about the EB-5 program. So we do have clients, and what I've heard from the team as well is that people are kind of just sometimes stopping and saying, you know what, let me see who gets elected here because I'm afraid that there might be changes to the program. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a natural concern given how volatile the immigration world can be under different administrations. So I understand that. It's important to remember that the direct EB-5 part of the program is law forever. The regional center program has been reauthorized until 2027. Generally speaking, EB-5 has pretty bipartisan support. Obviously congressmen and senators come and go, but generally speaking, it's a program that's had bipartisan support for many, many years, specifically because it creates economic activity and job creation in, districts across the US that are both Republican and Democrat. So, I typically, with any election, there's change. With USCIS Department of State, you often, you could potentially see processing slowdowns or upticks depending on policies that are passed under new administrations. But, I'm not concerned with the upcoming election and, any immediate changes to the EB-5 program for the reasons I've outlined, especially for the regional center, because it's, the program's extended until 2027. There's
Right.
efforts to renew it already. And it's a largely bipartisan. There's a lot of support across the aisles for it.
Thank you for that. I do think that as well, but um, yeah, we get this question all the time. So thanks for
Yeah.
explaining that. Our next slide here is about EB-5 visa benefits for someone that's just looking into EB-5, for someone that's just kind of looking into the having the idea of it and trying to understand, should I do it or should I not do it? What are the main benefits? I do have a few here. Permanent residency for the investor and the family, because the family is included in that one investment. No sponsorship needed. We know a lot of other programs that do need, sponsorship from an employer or things of that nature. And then the flexibility to live and work anywhere in the US. This I believe applies only to the regional center. You are more familiar with direct investors as well. Does this apply to direct investment or is just regional center? Like if a person is opening a business, they have to manage it, right? They have to stay where the business is, or they can live anywhere.
They could live anywhere, generally
Okay.
speaking. So you could, I have a lot of clients that pursue direct investment, and whether it's family or friends that have a business opportunity that they invest in, they don't have to be, they don't have to run the business and do the day to day. A lot of the times they're involved to a certain extent because they're entrepreneurs and they want to be.
Right.
Obviously the EB-5 investor generally has to have some role, whether it be policy making, voting, normal routine rights under an operating agreement. But even in the direct sense, you could potentially run a business and live somewhere else. That's perfectly
Right.
fine. Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what you were saying, Q, EB-5 has been popular for many years because there's no sponsorship requirement, right? You can invest and you have full control over your green card process in the sense that you're able to control your source of funds documentation. You invest when you want. You choose your project. The caveat there is that it's a large investment. Project selection is very important. Source of funds documentation is important. So in that sense, the burden's on the investor at the beginning of the process to provide documentation and help prove those things.
Right.
But as I'm sure you guys have seen now, there's a lot of individuals, born in China, born in India, who are subject to very long wait lists for, the other, EB-1, 2, and 3, for the
Right.
other, employment-based green cards. So I think that's why you're seeing a resurgence in EB-5 and processing's much quicker than it used to be.
Absolutely. I also have here access to US education and healthcare, and sometimes I kind of get pushed back on the healthcare point portion of it, where for some reason people outside the US think that our healthcare is horrible, but it's not the case. Actually, it's not that
Right.
bad. There are better systems, but it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my clients, are looking for in-state tuition. They're looking for certain
Right.
benefits that having a green card may or may not provide. Both education and healthcare are pretty state specific too nowadays. So, I always tell them, yeah, you have to check with the school you're looking at. Sometimes your employer may offer, healthcare that's going to be the same whether you're in H-1B status or whether you have a green card. But generally speaking, there's so much more flexibility. yeah, where you live, where you work, and what benefits come with education and healthcare once you have a green card. So I think they're important points to make.
Yeah. As you know as well, we've had most of our investors, or a large portion of them, are here for work opportunities, or they on H-1Bs, and they want
Right,
to expand, move to another employer or start their own
right.
business. So that's a big driver as well. And yes, we certainly have a lot of children that are being sponsored by parents that are studying here. And so that gives them, much lower tuition fees, often, it could be a quarter of what you'd pay as an international student. So that's definitely a
A huge
market as
benefit,
well.
right?
Yeah, a big benefit. And we've had people that are doing this purely for medical reasons as well,
Right.
having
That is
access
true.
to be able to retire and access the medical system in the US. So
That is
so
true.
that is, maybe not the biggest
We do
market,
have
but it is a market.
we do have some of the best doctors and science here.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So absolutely agree with both of you.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right, the EB-5 investor requirements. This is going to be kind of largely on Dennis to go over this. I just want to say that there are two parts of it, and the way I explained to everyone, just starting to look at EB-5 is like you have to think of the entire EB-5 process as split between two different things. Like these two are siblings, but they're separate. One is the regional center, basically, that's pooling your money, investing the money into a project, and providing project-related documentation. And the other portion of it is your own application, your own source of funds that is done with an EB-5 immigration attorney, which is the investor's attorney. You obviously look after their interests in that case, but there are two sides of it. So as a regional center, or wherever you decide to go, that regional center will provide documentation related to the projects that are required by USCIS, and then there are the investor requirements. And I would like to hear you explain that process, Dennis.
Sure. Yeah. So minimum investment. There's two thresholds. I can't say I've really had a client in the last 2 years that's looking at a non-TEA investment, right,
Okay.
where you're going to have the higher of the two thresholds, only because and we can talk about this later, but there's visa set-asides that were created under the new law that essentially have no wait list at present, and so because the new law allows for concurrent adjustment of status filing, if your priority date is current, then investing in a project that's in a TEA, which is a targeted employment area, either a rural area or higher than average unemployment, you're at that lower $800,000 threshold. The immigration benefits, though, are much more significant. You're, talking about concurrently filing adjustment of status, obtaining a separate work and travel permit, potentially having an adjudication in less than a year. Whereas if you're at the higher investment threshold in a non-TEA, for both, for India and China, those are very long wait lists at present. And for India, not as long, but much longer than if, not having one.
Right.
Job creation. I mean, job creation's, the goal of the EB-5 process. That's why the program itself was created back in the 90s. So, at the regional center level, jobs are going to be created pursuant to an economic study, okay, based on, essentially based on how much the project costs, spending, and revenue generation figures. So these are very formal studies that are, essentially accepted by the Department of Labor, and they're meant to calculate jobs based on spending. Okay, and so for
Right.
any regional center investor, you're going to have 10 jobs allocated per investor or more if there's a buffer, based on the size of the project and how much the project costs. Okay. If you're starting your own business, then that's very different. If you're pursuing a direct EB-5 investment, then you need to create 10 full-time W-2 positions at your business. And so,
And
that's
these
go ahead.
W-2 positions, or job creation just in general, I believe, is the time where you have to create these jobs is about 30 months. You have about 30 months after you've been approved, right? After that I-5.
Yeah, exactly. So it's 2.5 years after the adjudication of the I-526 or the I-526E. So for a lot of my clients, if they're starting their own business, those jobs are going to be created in that time frame because, it's just if it's a smaller business, construction isn't going to take as long.
Right.
But for, again, for regional center projects, it's an important, point because some projects take longer than others to
And
construct.
sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
no, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask here, like, if those jobs are created, let's say right now,
Hmm.
those count, right? They go in inventory, even like, let's say 2.5 years or 3 years from now, the project has been built, the money has been spent, the jobs have been created, that's still okay, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for the EB-5 investor, you want your funds, you want your funds to be used right by the project.
Right.
Whether your funds go in right at the beginning or towards the tail end, the total jobs created, you're eligible to be, to have your share of those, regardless of when you invest in most circumstances. You know, uh, NCE, New Commercial Enterprise, that's the company that receives EB-5 funds. So in the regional center context, the regional center manages the NCE. The regional centers in more of a, it's almost a fiduciary relationship with the NCE. The EB-5 investor invests into the NCE, and the NCE lends or invests funds with the developer in the regional center context. Similarly, in the direct contest, you're investing in the NC, and that company is the company that's operating your small business. Yeah, I don't want to get too far into what a troubled business is. You could potentially have a scenario where you invest in an existing business, and your funds help to preserve jobs that would have been lost but for your investment capital going in. You don't see a lot of these applications only because they're a bit more difficult in terms of how you essentially calculate, losses, which have to be calculated very specifically in order to determine whether the business is troubled. But you could have a scenario where, you invest in a business that's already active but isn't doing well, and you could potentially count the jobs that are already there, in different scenarios.
Understood. But it sounds a bit more complicated than the
It is.
straightforward kind of thing, hire people, build a business.
It's a lot more complicated than pursuing a regional center investment or starting your own new business for direct. It's far and away more difficult.
Got it. Got it. Uh, the EP5 process and timeline. So I have here just a few, points to file the I-526E petition, then comes the approval, then removal of conditions, and then permanent residency if approved. But I do have a chart here as well, and I would like to go by this. And I have a few questions in this chart. Now, the first thing I want to explain is that this average of 10 months for the I-526E approval, this is an industry average for rural projects, and we at EB-5 Coast to Coast are offering rural projects currently. So that's why I put the average 10 months there. However, I want to start from the beginning. So to just start, the very first step is, I believe, is the decision, right? Do you want to do EB-5? If you've decided, yes, I want to do EB-5, then there are two things you have to do. One is you have to start looking for a project where you're going to put your money. And then the other one is hiring an immigration attorney to do the source of funds. I always tell people the immigration attorney is more important. It's important that you have an immigration attorney because you can use that source of funds in any project that you choose, which is always good to have that, hurdle passed. But I have here as a timeline 1 to 2 months to complete source of funds, let's say. What do you
Hmm.
think? Is that a reasonable timeline, or do you see your clients taking longer to complete their source of funds?
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, generally speaking, most of my clients will engage my firm when they know they want to do this. They're probably looking at a few projects. They have funds that are available to invest. Yeah, 48 weeks is perfectly standard. I have clients that want to move more quickly, right? Their funds are liquid, they're ready to go, they picked their project. Sometimes we can move things, forward as quickly as 2 weeks. Generally, I'd say a majority of my clients will file in maybe 3 to 6 weeks after we engage. If funds are coming from abroad, if it involves the sale of property, or the disposition of other assets, you could have a longer timeline. Never, on my end, never rush. I always say we can work as quickly or as not quickly as you'd like, right? But I think 4 to 8 weeks is very standard for a majority of investors.
Beautiful. And then basically they finish the source of funds with you.
Hmm.
You tell them everything is okay, right? And then
Right.
they have to make the investment into the NCE, the $800,000. And then I know the regional center or the NCE will provide a document stating that this person has invested, and you're going to attach that to their application. Now, is there any other way of applying without actually investing the 800,000? What are your thoughts on this? What are the risks of that? If you could just give us a quick summary of it, I would appreciate
Yeah,
it.
yeah, sure. Yeah, so the law allows the EB-5 investor to essentially start the immigration process by filing Form I-526E with evidence that they're in the process of investing. So, generally speaking, what that means in practice is you could, start your immigration process, provide the immigration service with evidence that you've completed, say half the investment now. You're going to be contractually committed to invest in the remaining investment, the remaining tranche, so to speak, with the regional center by a certain date. We'll document the source of funds for the initial investment. We'll interfile, supplement the pending application with additional source of funds documents once you've completed the second investment installment. Um, yeah, I'd probably say half of my clients use this tactic for a variety of reasons, whether, again, the sale of an asset hasn't completed yet, whether, they want to move very quickly because they have funds that are liquid now to get their immigration process started sooner. And then, other funds are going to be coming into the picture 2 to 3 months later that exist, but just may not be ready yet.
Right.
So again, either process works. Generally I advise to try to do the full amount if you can, only because that's more likely to ensure a quicker adjudication. You could always have a request for evidence if your case gets looked at more quickly and you haven't completed the full investment, because it does have to be completed for the I-526E to be adjudicated. But generally speaking, either way is acceptable.
But if let's say someone has the money, I have the $800,000, but you have sometimes people that say, you know what, I want to do half right now and then wait until I'm approved to do the other half. That doesn't work, right?
No, no.
Okay.
I mean, you could potentially have USCIS approve a case with that. I mean, I've seen it happen rarely. It's typically a USCIS error if they do that. So again, it's not something I would ever expect. It's much more common for USCIS to issue a request for evidence and say, hey,
Where's the
you
rest
haven't
of the money,
provided this
right?
evidence. Yeah. Yeah.
Got you. And that just delays the process actually. If they
Yeah, it's going to delay your immigration timeline.
right. All right, so now they're approved. The I-526 is approved. Again, average 10 months, industry average in terms of rural projects. And then we have here adjustment of status or consulate process. Now, you mentioned before the concurrent filing. Now, with the new EB-5 rules, people can do concurrent filing if they are in the US. Can you explain just how does that work? How does the concurrent filing work?
Yeah, sure. So concurrent filing essentially means filing for adjustment of status together with your I-526E form. So all adjustment of status is it's essentially a change, an adjustment of your current underlying non-immigrant status to green card. Okay, so again, the I-526E is your base immigrant petition where you're asking USCIS for the right to file for a green card based on source of funds documents and project documents being approved. Okay. Before the new law passed in 2022, you had to wait for that initial form to be approved before you could file for adjustment of status in the US or go to a consulate for an interview abroad to get your green card abroad. Okay, consular processing still exists, is very common if you live outside the US. If you're in the US, adjustment of status is very attractive for a variety of reasons. And now you can file together with your I-526E. So you start that processing timeline at the same time as you start your I-526E adjudicatory timeline. Adjustment of status also allows you to file Form I-765 for a work permit and Form I-131 for advanced parole, which is essentially a travel permit. Okay, these applications are also filed together with the I-45 adjustment of status application. They're essentially backup documents for some of my clients. They're very important, though, if your underlying non-immigrant status doesn't allow you to work, or if you don't have a visa in your passport where you can travel. And so, essentially all the work, in this process is really done at the beginning, where we do source of funds documentation. You're looking at projects, and we're also preparing the adjustment of status package, which we file together with the I-526E. And again, once the I-526E is approved, shortly after the I-45 should be approved, and that's where your green cards will be printed and mailed to you. The only caveat is for the I-45 to be approved, your priority date has to be current pursuant to the visa bulletin. Okay?
Right. So if the priority date is not current, that green card then is not getting approved until a visa is available for you, but you still have that employment authorization, and you still have that right to work and live in the US and travel with a travel document, I believe, right?
Yep, that's correct. The 45 is pending. You can renew those documents if needed. Granted, they're now given for 5 years. The only other thing another enormous benefit of getting the adjustment of status in is it locks in your child's age if you have a child that is nearing 21, right? So filing for I-45 to adjust status is one of the relevant actions to seek to acquire a green card, which is a complicated term for taking a step to obtain permanent residency. And under the law, under the CSPA, it freezes all children's age when they're under 21. And so if you have a child that's nearing 21 that could be at a risk to aging out, to not being part of the family unit, getting the adjustment of status in is crucial.
Got it.
Dennis, what are you seeing at the moment timeline wise to get your work authorization and your travel card?
4 to 5 months. It used to be quicker. March, February, really January through April, I was seeing the EAD and the advanced parole be issued in 2 to 3 months. Some even as quick as 45 days. For all EB-5 related applications, it's 4 months is still sort of right in the middle. I've seen some clients take 5 to 6 months. Some are taking 3, but I'm telling my clients 4 to 5 months at present.
That's an average timeline. Okay.
Yeah.
And so now adjustment of status is done, or consular processing. You came to the US, or you were here, got a green card. Now this green card is conditional. It's a conditional green card that is issued and is good for 2 years, right? At the 2-year mark, or I believe it's like 1 year and 9 months, you can apply to remove the conditions. What do you see in terms of documentation at this stage?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, right, you have a 90-day window to file the I-829. The act of filing the I-829 will extend your conditional status. I have a lot of clients that ask me, what happens to my green card status? It's extended indefinitely. It doesn't end until the 829 is adjudicated. Okay. In terms of documentation, if you filed with the regional center, your immigration attorney will reach out to the regional center and essentially ask for an I-829 document template that is going to be prepared by the regional center and their counsel for every individual investor that's in that project, right? Because you need consistency in terms of the documents that are being filed. The documents that are filed include updates to the project, more specifically banking documentation and tax documentation to confirm that your funds exited the new commercial enterprise, they were used, by the developer, so to speak. So the funds were at risk, okay, and that they were sustained for at least, at least 2 years. Sustainment, we could have a whole conversation about sustainment generally, but the 829 requires evidence that the funds were sustained and that they were at risk, okay. And second, the jobs were created. So in the regional center context, that's going to be an updated economic impact report that has a final job creation number, okay, based
Right.
on final construction spending and other costs and revenue generation potentially. Again, in the regional center context, that's essentially it. There's not a whole lot of other documents that are going to be provided by the investor besides copies of their green card. If you happen to have started your own business and done direct investment, then there's much more documents that you're essentially going to be responsible for because, again, you're approving job creation. And so there's a whole host of documents on that end.
So now all the documentation is sent to USCIS, they come back, they remove the conditions from your green card, and then they issue a permanent green card, which is good for 10 years. Now, after 5 years of being a permanent resident in the US, you have the right to apply for citizenship, and that's optional, right? Like if you want to, you can get it. The 5 year counts from the moment they enter the US if they're doing consular processing. And then if they did concurrent filing, when does that 5 year
Yeah,
start ticking?
right. Right. So it starts when your green card is issued. So
Ah,
filing the adjustment of status doesn't start your green card clock, right? It's essentially the start date of your conditional green card. That's your first date as a conditional resident. And you're completely right, right? The time in conditional residence counts towards the essentially the 5 years needed for naturalization. With the one caveat that the 829 must be approved for the naturalization application to be approved, right? Okay, so you could have a scenario. I've had clients that have filed their N400s while the 829 was pending. You won't have an interview, for your N400 until that I-829 is approved because conditions have to be removed in order for you to naturalize.
understood. Okay. Now, and I know this is a huge topic, and I really want to do another webinar with you where we can dive into the source of funds documentation. But for our purposes today, to just give a general overview to potential EB-5 clients or EB-5 investors who are considering EB-5, can you just kind of just run through what is required as part of source of funds?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely could have a separate webinar just on this. So
I know,
so
right?
it's the burden is on the investor to provide immigration service with objective documentation that proves the lawful source of funds and a clear path of funds for their investment. So, generally speaking, yeah, the four points here are very, very common. Most of my clients, make their own income, whether it's through self-employment or through an employer. They usually invest their income in brokerages, and so again, investment income, personal income, very common.
Okay.
The sale of property or assets is also incredibly common. I'd also say, it's coupled there with loans, but loans using property as collateral, whether it's a HELOC or some other type of debt instrument, are also very common. Whenever you sell property or sell an asset, USCIS is going to be concerned with the sale and how that asset was obtained in the first place. So we, peel back an onion essentially and take one step back to confirm how the asset or how the property was acquired. Inheritance, perfectly fine. Gifts are perfectly fine. Typically with inheritance, there are certain documents depending on the country of origin that will, confirm inheritance, confirm what probate looked like. Gifts from friends, family members, also perfectly fine. And again, the analysis begins with the donor. As if the donor wired you funds on day one, if you go back a day, what was the source of those funds in that person's bank account? before they gifted you money. That's where that analysis would start.
So if your parents gift you the money to do EB-5, then the parents have to prove source of funds. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
And
Exactly.
loans, I have a quick question here. There are secured and unsecured loans, right? Like loans that you could take from a friend, family member, you agree to pay them back, you have loan documents in place. That's fine, correct?
Yep.
But
Yes.
sorry, for an
No.
unsecured loan, then the source of funds has to be done on where the person got the money that loaned it to you, correct?
Yeah. So generally speaking, you're right. So both collateralized secured loans are perfectly fine. And as of about 4 years ago, there's an important court case. Unsecured loans, uncollateralized loans are also perfectly fine. With any loan, the USCIS is concerned with the source of the funds that are being lent to you. So if the funds are coming from a bank or a credit union or a large financial institution or lending company, you know, the USCIS isn't going to ask the bank or the credit union to pry open their books, right? But if the loan is coming from a friend, then the source of funds analysis is the same as where someone gifts you funds, right? And again, as we mentioned a few points back, if the loan is collateralized, then USCIS will inquire as to how the collateral, how the underlying asset was obtained. Okay, and so there's sort of a two-part analysis in that sense.
Understood. Thank you,
Yeah, no problem. We
Dennis.
can, yeah.
And I think we might have a bit of time to just go over this, the changes that happened to the EB-5 program in 2022. I think a lot of people now, doing research on EB-5, they sometimes get conflicted answers because there was quite different in the past, and there is still old information out there. So if we could just go over what changed in the EB-5 program in 2022, that would be great.
We could have a whole PowerPoint
Again,
slide on
I know
this
we
too.
can.
No, these are all good points. Obviously, the EB-5 Regional Center program was reauthorized for 5 years. There was a somewhat complicated process of reauthorizing regional centers. And again, I won't dive too deeply into that, but nowadays, most regional centers have filed the relevant paperwork to be reauthorized. They are sponsoring new projects. The investment amount has gone up. Again, I can't think of a project on the market. There may be a few that are at the $1,050,000 mark. But they're usually very small and geared towards specific investor type class. I'd say one of the most important points is there's now visa set-asides, right? So there's 10,000 visa, essentially around 10,000 visas a year for fiscal year for the EB-5 program. The new law carved out visa set-asides for rural areas, for high unemployment areas, and for infrastructure projects for investors who invest post 2022. Okay, and so those visa numbers, specifically for rural and high unemployment, are still current. And so again, if you're an EB-5 investor investing now, you're going to be making use of these set-asides. Priority processing for rural projects is real in the sense that USCIS is giving them priority. Far and away the quickest adjudications I've had are for investors that file that invest in a rural project, and that rural project has their I-956F project application approved. I've seen adjudications anywhere between 6 to 10 months, sometimes quicker than that, but I'd say 6 to 12 months is what I'm currently seeing, which is great, which is much quicker than before. There's a ton of investor protections, audits for regional centers, the individuals who run regional centers, the integrity provisions that were drafted into the law in 2022, are strong, and I think that was something that Congress and various factions always wanted in terms of increasing investor protection, in terms of who they're investing with and what those principles at regional centers have to do to protect investors and to make sure they're operating under the law. Sustainability, we could have a conversation just on this. It's before the RIA passed in 2022, the investors' funds had to be sustained at risk during the entire 2-year green card period. And so what that meant for Indian and Chinese investors and sometimes Vietnamese investors is an incredibly long sustainment period because of slow processing and a visa backlog. Okay. The new law states that funds have to be sustained for not less than 2 years. That's a very broad prong of the statute. USCIS hasn't passed formal regulations that interpret that yet. There are lawsuits pending asking USCIS to do that and also challenging what the sustainability period is. At the end of the day, the new law did change the sustainability language, in terms of having funds sustained at risk. I think we're going to see, probably in the next year what that language really means and hopefully have, clarity in terms of when that period starts and when it ends.
But as it stands right now, or as it is understood, I guess, does that sustainability period start when they invest the money or when they get the I-526 approved?
So USCIS has frequently they have an FAQ on their website, which is essentially the only thing we've heard from USCIS in terms of interpreting what this means. I tend to be very conservative on this point because we don't have more formal regulations on this issue. I think at a minimum, your sustainment clock starts when you've made the full 800. When those funds are made available to the entity that's most responsible for creating jobs. And I think you need to have job creation. You need to have job creation met for that for funds to come back, right? For that that sustainment period to be deemed over. So minimum of 2 years for sure, and then. And again, obviously your EB-5 investor funds are going to be, at risk based on, the project, right? However long, the project's construction loan term or investment term is with the developer first, right? That's what you always look at first. From an immigration standpoint, we should have more clarity soon, but that's a good question. And I don't think we have a perfect answer just yet.
We don't have a perfect answer on that yet.
Yeah.
But the good news is that you're not tied to that immigration process. Now it's more of, has the job creation been met? Has the money has been invested,
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think, far and away, you're going to have shorter sustainment periods because there's no language that says your funds have to be at risk during the conditional green card
Right.
process, essentially the duration of that process, which again, for investors in the future, that you may be subject to a wait list. So that period won't start for many more years. So that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. That was very interesting.
Is there any final
Happy to help.
thoughts? Anything else you guys want to add?
I'm good, Q. I think it was very well summarized. I mean, as you pointed out, there are a lot of topics that we can delve into on other webinars,
Absolutely.
but I think that was a very good overview.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you, guys.
I agree.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yep.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you for having me.
Of
See you
course.
guys soon. Take care.
Bye.